Number 5. Crescent Hotel, Eureka Springs, Arkansas. The Crescent Hotel opened in 1886 as a grand mountain resort in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas. By the 1930s, it had fallen into financial ruin. That is when Norman Baker arrived. Baker had no medical license, no medical degree of any kind. What he had was a radio station in Iowa, a remarkable talent for salesmanship, and a complete willingness to prey on people who were dying and desperate. In 1937, he purchased the Crescent Hotel and reopened it as the Baker Cancer Hospital. He ran radio advertisements across the country promising to cure cancer without surgery, without radiation, without pain. Desperate patients arrived from every state. They paid everything they had. His treatments consisted of injections of alcohol, carbolic acid, and watermelon seed extract. People died on his tables. Their bodies were moved through the basement corridors at night, specifically at night, so that the other patients who were still alive would not see them being carried out. In 1940, federal authorities arrested and convicted Norman Baker of mail fraud. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. When investigators went through the Crescent Hotel, they found a morgue in the basement, an autopsy table, a walk-in cooler. An estimated 300 patients who had come to Baker for treatment were never properly accounted for. In 2019, workers excavating behind the hotel unearthed hundreds of buried bottles, preserved tissue samples, and quantities of Baker's formula. Evidence of what this building was used for is still coming out of the ground. The morgue is still in the basement. It has not been removed. You can visit it on a tour. Guests staying in the hotel report a figure standing in the old autopsy room. A man in a white suit, completely still, watching. Norman Baker always wore white. Number 4. The Stanley Hotel, Estes Park, Colorado. The Stanley Hotel was built in 1909 by Freelan Oscar Stanley, the inventor of the Stanley steamer automobile, in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. It was designed as a grand resort, impeccable, remote, surrounded by mountains on every side. In the autumn of 1974, a struggling author named Stephen King arrived with his wife Tabitha. They were among the last guests of the season. The hotel was closing for the winter the following day. The hallways were empty. The dining room was empty. Most of the building was already shut down around them. That night, in room 217, King woke from a nightmare. In it, his young son was running down the endless corridors of the hotel, screaming, being pursued by the hotel's own fire hose, which had come alive and was coiling after the boy like a snake. King got up, stepped out onto the balcony, lit a cigarette, and stood looking at the mountains in the cold dark. By the time he finished that cigarette, The Shining existed in outline form. Room 217 had its own documented history before Stephen King ever checked in. In 1911, a housekeeper named Elizabeth Wilson was lighting the gas lanterns in room 217 during a storm-caused power outage. There was a gas leak she did not know about. The room exploded. Elizabeth Wilson survived, badly injured, but alive. Her presence in that room, according to decades of documented guest reports, never left. Unmarried couples who sleep in room 217 consistently report a cold presence settling into the bed between them during the night. The fourth floor the former staff quarters, produces the sound of children laughing when no children are staying on that floor. Multiple guests over multiple decades have reported a young boy who appears at the far end of the corridor and vanishes completely when approached. The grand piano in the ballroom plays by itself. Hotel staff have documented it. Guests have filmed it. The recordings exist. Freelan Oscar Stanley died in 1940. The investigators who have spent the most time in this building believe with considerable consistency that he never actually left it. Number 3. Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Louisville, Kentucky. In the early years of the 20th century, Louisville, Kentucky had one of the highest tuberculosis death rates in the United States. Tuberculosis, the White Plague, destroyed the lungs slowly and without mercy. Patients coughed blood. They lost weight until there was nothing left. They took months to die, and those months were not quiet. In 1910, Waverly Hills Sanatorium opened on a hill above the city, specifically to contain tuberculosis patients and separate them from the general population. Estimates based on death certificates and surviving medical records put the number of people who died inside this building at approximately 6,000 to 8,000 over 50 years of operation. At the height of the epidemic, a patient died inside Waverly Hills nearly every single day. To protect the morale of the living patients, to prevent them from seeing how many of their fellow patients were dying, the administration constructed a 500-foot underground concrete tunnel running beneath the hill. Bodies were placed on gurneys and sent down through it to waiting hearses at the bottom, out of sight in the dark. The staff called it the body chute. The patients called it the death tunnel. Room 502, top floor of the building. A nurse who had worked at Waverly Hills for years contracted tuberculosis. She was facing the prospect of becoming a patient in the same building where she had watched so many others die. By most accounts, and the accounts are consistent, she hanged herself in that room rather than go through what she had witnessed happening to others. Waverly Hills does not offer the subtle, ambient haunting that characterizes most locations on this list. What investigators describe here is direct and physical, being scratched across the back mid-session with no one standing behind them. Shadow figures that pace the full length of corridors at a steady, deliberate speed. The sound of wet, heavy coughing rising from floors that have been confirmed completely empty. Virtually every major paranormal investigation team that has worked at Waverly Hills names it the same thing. Not one of the most active locations they have entered, not among the most disturbing, the most consistently. Every team, the same answer. Number 2. Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Eastern State Penitentiary opened on October 25, 1829, and was immediately the most expensive building ever constructed in the United States. Its architecture was deliberately designed to intimidate. Massive stone walls, a spoken hub layout, cells with individual exercise yards so that no prisoner would ever see another human being. The design philosophy had a name, the Pennsylvania System. Its core principle was total isolation. Every prisoner lived alone, worked alone, ate alone, exercised alone in a walled individual yard attached to their cell. Guards wore soft fabric covers over their shoes so that inmates could not hear footsteps approaching. Prisoners were hooded when moved between locations so that they could not see the face of another person for years at a time. Charles Dickens visited Eastern State in 1842 and wrote that the isolation system inflicted, in his words, a psychological suffering that no man has the right to inflict upon another. Many inmates lost their sanity entirely under the system, not gradually, completely, and permanently. In 1929, Al Capone arrived, convicted of carrying a concealed weapon. His cell on cell block 7 was furnished with fine rugs, a cabinet radio, and original artwork. He served 8 months. During those 8 months, Capone told his guards that he was being haunted, specifically and repeatedly by James Clark, one of the men killed in the St. Valentine's Day massacre that Capone himself had ordered. Fellow inmates reported hearing Capone screaming in the night, begging someone unseen to leave him alone, to go away, to stop. After his release, Capone hired a psychic named Alice Britt specifically to remove the haunting from him. It did not work. By multiple accounts, James Clark followed Al Capone for the remainder of his life. Eastern State Penitentiary was abandoned in 1971. Today, it operates as a historic site and one of the most rigorously and repeatedly investigated paranormal locations in the world. What investigators consistently describe is not dramatic. There are no explosions of activity, no violent episodes. What they describe is oppressive, a weight in the air that compounds the longer you remain inside. Voices from sealed cells that respond directly and specifically to questions being asked out loud, as though someone behind the stone wall is listening, as though the isolation never ended, as though the prisoners are still in their cells, still alone, still waiting for someone to finally open the door. Number 1. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, Weston, West Virginia. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is the largest hand-cut stone masonry building in North America, purportedly the second largest in the world, behind only the Kremlin in Moscow. The sheer scale of it is the first thing that hits you before you know its history, before you know what happened inside it. The building itself communicates something is wrong simply by existing at the size that it does. Construction ran from 1858 to 1881. The building was designed to house 250 patients. By the 1950s, it held 2,400. Hold that number. A building architected, designed, and constructed for 250 human beings, now containing nearly 10 times that. No space, no adequate staffing to match that population, no meaningful treatment available for most of the conditions represented. What followed is not speculation. It is documented in the asylum's own administrative records. Physical abuse, systematic neglect, experimental medical procedures performed on patients without their consent, human beings warehoused in conditions that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with containment and concealment. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum operated until 1994. Over 2,000 people are buried in the cemetery on its grounds. Here is what separates this location from every other place on this list. Every other haunted location produces phenomena that investigators can categorize: sightings, sounds, cold spots, the feeling of a presence, the sense of being watched. These are unsettling. They are documented. They are real. Trans-Allegheny produces physical contact, not the suggestion of contact, not the feeling that something brushed past. Investigators are pushed hard enough to stumble, scratched across the arms and back mid-session, with camera footage confirming no one was standing behind them. In multiple documented cases, thrown sideways off balance by a force that no recording equipment captured. The building contains 3.5 miles of hallways. Some wings have never been fully investigated, not because access is restricted, but because investigation teams have been unable to remain in those sections long enough to complete their work. They leave every time. The people who study haunted locations professionally, the ones who have worked Eastern State Penitentiary, Waverly Hills, the Queen Mary, all of it, they come to Trans-Allegheny and they stop using the word word haunted, they use a different word, heavy, like the weight of every person who suffered inside those walls over 136 years of operation never left the stone, like it compressed into the building itself, like it has been sitting in those hallways, in those wards, in those uninvestigated wings, quietly, patiently, with nowhere else to go, and it has been waiting for someone to walk far enough in that it can finally reach them. This is the #1 most haunted place in America you should never visit at night. If you go anyway, do not go to the uninvestigated wings. Do not go alone. And whatever you hear calling your name from the far, dark end of a corridor, do not answer it. #1. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, Weston, West Virginia. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum is the largest hand-cut stone masonry building in North America, purportedly the second largest in the world, behind only the Kremlin in Moscow. The sheer scale of it is the first thing that hits you, before you know its history, before you know